What's going on YouTube? Andrew Miller, Tarik LaCour, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com. We're going to come back at y'all today with first video here in about a week. I was out last weekend for a bachelor party, but we're taking a look today at Texas's Big 12 opener facing Baylor this weekend on the road. Second primetime game on the road under the lights already this season. You already had Alabama in week 2. Now you got Baylor in week 4. Baylor comes into this game with some pretty obvious struggles to start the season. They had that double-digit loss to Texas State to open the season, and then I would even say like there were parts of that Utah game that they lost. Utah was really banged up, and I know Utah's still a solid team, but Baylor had easy chances, I think, to seal that game down the stretch, and they weren't able to. And last weekend against Long Island, they, 15 points or so from covering the spread against an 0-3 FCS team. Baylor is underwhelmed, I think, in every single game they've played at different points this season, specifically for that Utah game in the second half. Texas comes in. It's not like it's been a perfect ride for them, but, a pretty successful non-conference slate, all things considered. Week 1, you get the 37-10 win over Rice. But Texas's obvious big win from the non-conference slate is Alabama, that week 2 win. Alabama had their struggles against South Florida. That was quite obvious, but that Alabama defense is for real, and Texas put up 34 points on them in their home stadium. And then week 3, Texas, again, slow out of the gates in the first half, comes out with a 21-point fourth quarter to beat Wyoming 31-10. So Texas rolling into conference play. I saw a stat where Texas is the only FBS team right now with an undefeated 3-0 record, with 3 wins against teams that were in bowl games last year. So there's something. But I feel good about this Baylor game. But it's still Baylor on the road. They got plenty to prove. They don't want to go 1-3 to start the season. I'm sure Dave Aranda's been preparing for this for the last 2 weeks. They probably didn't prepare a ton for Long Island, or at least spend a lot of time game planning and practice. So
I hope not, given how they played.
Yeah, anyway, I want to bring this back to what I was saying earlier. I think there's a small talking point here between Rice and Wyoming that not a lot of people are giving credence to. I think the overarching point is that, I think Wyoming's a pretty good team that's pretty scrappy, and they figured out a way to get Quinn Ewers uncomfortable pretty much throughout the game, which is worrisome. But Wyoming's a tough team, and I think they're going to be really solid in the Mountain West this year. Also in the Big 12, we've seen some teams that were expected to be solid bowl teams this year that have had some embarrassing showings against G5 teams. Baylor against Texas State, Oklahoma State against South Alabama, easily the worst of the bunch. To a larger point, there's been a lot of bad G5 losses in the Big 12 this year, and Baylor had one of them. And so, Texas has played 2 of the better G5 teams, I think, and they came away with 2 wins by a combined, 57 points, and so 58 points. I think that Rice is going to end up actually being a pretty good team this year. They have a win over Houston. I think they've looked solid in their other 2 games that they've played this year, and so I don't think enough people are giving credence to that, but it's not a huge talking point either moving forward. I think heading into Big 12 play, Texas has become a stronger second half team. They've passed a lot of tests that in years past they wouldn't have. I feel good about that part of it. But, this is the first year that Texas is really going to have the target on their back in this type of way. Final year in the Big 12 before leaving for the SEC, the clear, favorite to win the conference. And just a lot of these teams aren't going to be playing Texas for a long, long time. I know they talked about keeping Texas Tech as a potential non-conference foe, but I don't think Baylor's going to be playing Texas for a while. Probably same with the Kansas schools, Iowa State.
I don't care to ever play Texas Tech ever again after November 26th or whatever it is.
I'd agree with you. I don't see any reason to go back to Lubbock in the non-con. So
I don't see any reason to go to Lubbock, period.
Yeah, you make a fair point.
It's just a town. It's a town that could be torn down, completely flattened, and nobody would care. Not even the people who live there. They're like, you know what? You're probably doing us a favor.
Yeah. But heading into Big 12 play, I feel pretty good There's some tests that I think Texas is going to have a tough time passing that they still should win. I'll pass it over to y'all. What are your feelings coming out of the non-con and then heading into Big 12 play?
Shannon, you can start us off.
Yeah, I think that, while we can certainly get bogged down in what was the first 3 quarters against Wyoming, I think if you ask any Texas fan, and you tell them you're going to be 3-0 heading into conference play with what we had in week 2, they're going to take that no matter how it looked. And I think against Rice and Wyoming, Sark just tried to beat his opponents with base scheme, not trying to show too much. Andrew, you mentioned that kind of went out the window in the fourth quarter when they needed those points. But I still feel very confident heading into Big 12 play, especially with what we've seen around the conference. You mentioned it, Andrew, a lot of losses to G5 teams. Oklahoma's obviously looks solid, but I think there's going to be some room to win some games here like we all expected. So I think the expectations should still be very high. And while I do think this is going to be a tough game in Waco, this probably isn't – this might be the worst Baylor team that Aranda has had. So I think there are ways that the Texas offense specifically can exploit the Baylor defense, and I'm hoping we jump out to an early lead and then are kind of able to salt it away with a lot of Jonathan Brooks and CJ Baxter.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Shane, I definitely think this is the worst Baylor defense, at least under Dave Aranda. It's not often that you have a defensive head coach, especially with the background of Dave Aranda, that's having the sort of struggles they're having this year. In adjusted defensive efficiency, according to the FEI, they're 60th, but they rank outside of the top 90 in the FBS, so bottom 40 in the FBS in points per game allowed, yards per play, points per drive. It's all around. This is not the Baylor defense of the last few years, the one that led them to a Big 12 title a couple of years ago, even the one when they were healthier last year that was still pretty formidable. I got to say that this Baylor defense has definitely not impressed me so far. But anyway, Tarik, what do you got?
Considering that it had been, 11 years since Texas had started off 3-0, you'll take the 3-0 however you get it, especially when you have Alabama. And I think some people are looking at Alabama and kind of looking at it after the USF game when they played everyone except Jalen Milroe for reasons only known to Nick Saban and God. But they don't forget that there's tons of NFL talent all over that team. I expect them to regroup and do well. And Saban just doesn't lose much, period. And I don't expect that to change. So, definitely don't take that one as important, but don't make that your whole season. You still have 9 more games to go. As far as Rice and Wyoming, I kind of had the feeling Sark was just calling play. It was almost like watching a pickup basketball game where there was no real plan. You were just kind of playing around, and you kind of felt like, well, I know I'm going to win, so it doesn't matter. I think you can do that against those teams. You can't do that against anyone in the Big 12, even the bad teams. I think when you have higher caliber of athletes. That said, I expect Texas should beat Baylor by 2 touchdowns. I mean, Utah basically just toyed with Baylor for that whole time, and then at the end they're like, okay, let's win now, and then Baylor couldn't stop them. I don't see any Dave Aranda without Matt Rule's players is, I don't know. I mean, he's like Scott Frost or something. I don't know, just bad. There's no other way to say it. It's losing to Texas State. I don't. It like the story writes itself at that point. So yeah, I expect Texas to win this week, and I think they should do so in impressive.
So this is one thing I wanted to dig into before we I think it's a good lead in to kind of where I want to go with this video. So, this week I want to talk more about, like, especially for this type of game where Texas is a, double-digit favorite, almost a 3-score favorite on the road at this point. That clearly shows Vegas thinking highly of Texas in this game. but why Texas could dominate Baylor this weekend. And also, some potential concerns, because I don't think every Texas fan is just thinking that, without a solid game plan and without good execution, that Sark and the Longhorns are just going to walk in there and trample Baylor. That's not the way that's going to go. And so, the one thing I did want to talk about, though, leading into this video was the feeling that I get from hearing some of Dave Aranda's press conferences and some of the Baylor media talking about this Dave Aranda team. Aranda's mentioned multiple times that he thinks he has one of the better rosters in the conferences, has a ton of talent. And he even mentioned earlier this week in a press conference that he feels like that he has a roster capable of winning a championship. They've had a lot of bad penalties this year. They've had a lot of poor execution, again, bad on defense, which is Aranda's side of the ball. There's a lot of different parts adding up here where obviously these parts don't equal a championship level team, but also a lot of these things are just, it feels like this team is kind of detached from Aranda's personality. He's mentioned that the execution is there in practice in different press conferences the last 3 weeks, and he doesn't know why it's not there in game. And that's very telling to me that, that his feeling, his pulse of the locker room is not there anymore. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree that when you think of Dave Aranda football, you think we're going to dominate you on the defensive side of the ball, and the offense is going to do what they do to get you the win. And that really hasn't been the case. Like you said, a TJ Finley led Texas State team. We've seen TJ Finley in the SEC against, halfway decent defenses, and he could not compete. So the fact that he was able to go in there and torch Baylor is definitely a cause for concern. You can throw the Utah game kind of out the window in regard to offense, because Utah didn't have a quarterback that could throw the ball. They were just kind of basically running Jaquindon Jackson back there and just pounding it down their throat. So I do think it is definitely concerning. And I think you make a good point, because David Aranda, especially that year, 2021, where won the Big 12 title, that had a Dave Aranda defensive identity where you knew every game they were going to come out there and they were going to punch you in the mouth. And that doesn't feel like it's going to happen this year. I think the Texas offense should find a lot of success in both the outside zone and pushing the ball down the field. So that's not something we typically see against Dave Aranda defenses. And I think it speaks to, Andrew, what you're saying, that this team really doesn't even have an identity at all. Not only do they not have an Aranda identity, they don't seem to have any sort of identity. And in college, when you don't have an identity, that's tough, and that'll get you beat week in and week out.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. Things. This is apart from Dave Aranda, but when your side of the ball that you specialize in is arguably the worst part of your team, yeah, that's what else needs to be said at that point. I think what Aranda is showing is something that the former head coach Mel Tucker of Michigan State also showed, that we can crown coaches too quickly after having one good season. I mean, there were lots of Texas fans on Twitter saying, "Oh, if Sark doesn't work out, we have to get Aranda," or this, that, and the other. And I was saying, let's not jump to this too fast. You need more data. And the data has come in, and it's not good. So I think Aranda is starting to show that he's probably just a better coordinator than head coach. And also, I think that certain people really have to attack the portal in a certain way if they're going to be successful in the modern era of college football. And Baylor's a program that's like that. I mean, you will occasionally get, like Texas Tech got Micah Hudson, you will occasionally get a guy like that, but that's not you're not going to win with just the straight up high school recruits. You're going to have to get some guys in the portal. And I don't know that Aranda's really done that. So the results are what you would kind of expect.
Yeah, and Baylor typically is a program that relies on development. And I thought kind of one of the interesting underlying storylines of this game is, two solid development pieces on the Longhorns, and Byron Murphy and Jahdae Barron were former Baylor commits. So that is when Texas is stealing those guys and developing them, that's when Baylor is kind of at their lowest point.
Yeah, and I mean Alfred Collins, another guy that was heavy on Baylor before Matt Rule left in what was that 2019, 2020. And so yeah, that's a fair point. As bad as this Baylor defense has been at times early in the season, I still get a little concerned when Texas is playing on the road against that three high defense. Sark has not had a ton of success against this 3-3-5 defense.
I mean, I get what you're saying. It's a harder defense for quarterbacks to play against, but as Georgia kind of showed, the way to do that is just to run it down their throats until they can stop it and then play action.
Yeah,
which Sark did at the end. I think they in the third quarter they should have just said, okay, we're just going to run the ball and we're not going to throw it until they make us do it. And Sark still tried to throw a little bit in the third quarter, and that messed things up. And we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with some penalties, but yeah.
Are you talking about Baylor, Iowa State last year?
I'm talking about when we played Wyoming.
Oh, Wyoming. Oh, yeah. Well, Wyoming also played that 3-high look.
That's what I'm saying. They're the most recent.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hamstrung us to where we didn't have a lot of like clean or like one-on-one looks on the deep ball, and I think Baylor's going to try to do some of the same of force Quinn to beat them with being able to pick them apart in that short and intermediate passing game. I think they're going to throw some ghost pressures at us like they did last year. This defense isn't as good as the one Baylor had last year against Texas, but I still think that Quinn is going to have to be able to process things very fast. The offensive line is going to have to be good, and we'll have to communicate well. If Texas can, come out and set the tone early, get Quinn some good early completions, I do think that Texas has the opportunity to run away with this game, because this is a Baylor team. And I guess I'll go ahead and get into some of my points here why I think Texas could really control this game. I've been really, really low on this Baylor secondary compared to how I have been in years past. I think their secondary last year and the year before were really good, but this year they're really young. They're having a lot of trouble staying with receivers, like even G5 level receivers this year. They're giving up a ton of yards per play. I think that Texas can pick apart this secondary. It's not a good matchup for Baylor. One stat that caught my eye: Baylor has the highest missed tackle rate in coverage this year of any Big 12 team. They're not contesting space very well, especially in the short and intermediate passing game. And guys are getting a lot of yards after the catch against them as well. They're second. I think out of the gates, you can kind of set the tone here by getting the ball out to Worthy, maybe getting him, maybe bunching him up over on field side, and getting him behind Jordan Whittington and letting him go to town. Or you can do Adonai Mitchell. Was I the only one that noticed that Adonai Mitchell was looking better blocking last week?
Yeah, he definitely was. More effort for sure.
Yeah.
It's really just an effort thing for him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a big dude. So.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think with the better blocking efforts, you can get some of these guys going in the horizontal passing game to get them going early.
Yeah, well, to that, I'll jump in here real quick, Andrew. To that, I completely agree with you. I think you can definitely attack the Baylor secondary. I also think that it's one of those things that's very fickle, because if you do come out trying to throw the ball, especially down the field, and Quinn is missing like he was last week, that's how you start to get yourself in a rock fight where the ball goes back into the Bears' hands and they just, control it like Wyoming did in that third quarter and just don't give it back. So I think it's going to be big, a lot of short passing game. Like we saw, get the ball to Xavier Worthy and let him run. Like, don't just put it on Quinn right away to attack the Baylor secondary deep, because like we said, they play three in the back. And I think Sark might want to attack them because they're a little weaker. I think the move is to get it out quick to your guys in space and let them work, and then it'll slowly start to open things up. But the last thing you want is Quinn Ewers to struggle early, and then you go into halftime, it's a tie football game, and you go into the fourth quarter, and that's how you get yourself in trouble. So I think definitely build up his confidence. We talked about this last week. Don't just throw Quinn right into the deep shots, but kind of let him work his way through his progressions and down the field.
They didn't take any deep shots last week.
Yeah, no, I went through all of Quinn's attempts over 15 yards. He was only 1 for 5, and none of them were over 23 air yards. So yeah, it was a lot of. They had the one the one JT Sanders from like the 23 at the goal line and in the air, it was like a 30-yard pass, but it was well over his head. So
it's hard to measure air yards with Quinn sometimes. Yeah, Shane, I like that you bring that up because that's where I was trying to go here, was like where kind of Texas can set the tone here. And the other way I was going to mention, you guys have hit on it already. The way that Utah beat Baylor was just running it down their throats, man. They figured out they could run inside, run between the tackles, and Baylor, they are small at nose. They do not have much size over the football. They're starting nose for most, I'd say about like 80% of snaps this season is Cooper Lance, a 287-pound nose tackle.
They had Siaki Ika last year, and we still ran it all over him. So size wasn't going to help either way.
Yeah, Siaki Ika, what was he, a third-round pick in the NFL draft? Like, yeah, he's a really good nose tackle. And so
I thought he was going to be higher than that based on not last year, but the year before. He was really good.
Yeah. Well, and so I think, I know Sark likes to set the tone with the outside zone running game. I know that's his bread and butter, but like, and you could probably do that here, but like Baylor does have some pretty good linebackers. Matt Jones, solid. I do think their linebacking core might be the strength of their defense. Probably is the strength of their defense, but I think you can run it straight down their throats to get started, especially if we have a healthy Baxter. Man, he was running hard against Alabama. I think Jake Major's been blocking for the run pretty well. DJ Campbell, I mean, he's slow coming out of the gates, but once he gets going, man, he's physical. And so you clean up the penalties with Hayden Connor. I think that we got some good stuff with the interior line versus their D line. And then, Tarik, you mentioned it. You guys are kind of putting this all together for me. But you mentioned it with like just the way this Baylor defense goes. Maybe get some inside zone stuff going, running between the tackles. You can bring in the play action. And then, you suck in either that Mike linebacker down wherever you want to line up JT Sanders with. Hit him with play action, suck the linebacker down to the line of scrimmage, or if they have an aggressive safety, opens up the seam, hit that seam, kind of like you did against Alabama. They're not tackling well. Who knows where that goes? That can go 30, 40 yards downfield. They've been giving up a ton of explosive plays. And so I don't think they're super well equipped to handle linebacker or I don't think their defensive backs are super well equipped to handle that big of a tight end either. They got some smaller, more inexperienced guys, and Sanders really big, physical, can make a lot of guys miss. If Texas can set the tone, get some solid early run plays, get some chunk plays, get Baxter and Brooks involved early, and then, get some guys out in space and get Quinn some easy reads early on. I think that's just the key for Texas to be able to start running away with this one, because then you can start hitting the deep ball. Then you start getting this Baylor defense that has so many young defensive backs. Y'all know that Baylor's best defensive back, Devin Lemere's questionable for this game. They've been having to rotate guys around, and so that might be tough for Baylor. If he's out, though. If he's back in this game, then I think they'll be a little bit more solid back there.
Yeah, and I think full circle on the conversation about the Baylor defense is that lack of a truly dominant nose that can just eat up two blockers, because that's what Aranda kind of needs for his defense to function as a whole. And with Ika gone, they just don't have that. And for all the conversation we had this offseason about Jake Majors not being the ideal center for this offense and for him being a little too small, this is a matchup that he can totally dominate in. So I would like to see Sark try to run the ball in between the tackles more often and see what those guys in the middle can do.
Yeah. Do y'all? I posted this on the site earlier today. Y'all know how many rushing yards Baylor's given up so far this year in 3 games?
A lot, close to 1,000.
Not that much, but
I would say Utah probably got them for 250 or 300, maybe like 500.
They've been it's around 650 that they've given up.
Okay, so close, not that far away from 1,000.
And one of those teams was an 0-3 FCS team, mind you.
Yeah.
And so
they played Utah, Long Island State, and Texas State, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. If you gave up 200 plus to Utah, which is a really strong running team and things like that, I mean, that's forgivable, but come on.
Yeah. Worst in the Big 12. They've given up the most yards per carry, most rushing yards, and most rushing touchdowns. They've also given up the most yards per carry and yards after contact on rushes between the A gaps and B gaps. I don't think there's an easy fix for them there. I think we've kind of illustrated the point there. you know, I think I know that Baylor's offense is better than their defense by a mile at this point. You know, their offense ranks, I think it's 35th in adjusted efficiency. They've done decently well, all things considered. They're probably starting Sawyer Robertson in this game. I think that Texas can't. There's things that Texas can't do, and I guess maybe this is more of a concern area. But like, I think there's, you know what? Let me toss that aside. I don't need to get into that yet. Anything else that y'all wanted to mention, talking about kind of Texas's offense versus Baylor's defense?
Just just take care of the ball, which we've been doing, and get out of there with the W. You don't need to get overly fancy. Just keep playing disciplined football, and I think we should be fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to open. I mean, I will say this: Sark needs to script out more than he has the first couple, at least between Wyoming and Rice. But you should, like I said, you should be able to just run the football and use play action. There should be a big game for JT Sanders and I think for Gunnar Helm too. I was very impressed with Gunnar Helm. The past 3 weeks, actually, I think he's been great. The guy, he's forgotten because he's behind JT Sanders with it, but he's got some talent.
Starting to come into his own as a receiver and a route runner, I think.
And I'd say for all the kind of benefit of the doubt that we've given Sark for weeks 1 and 3, kind of being vanilla and stuff like that, the offense can't look clunky tonight or on Saturday, because if it does, then you kind of throw out that, they only struggled against Wyoming because it was super vanilla. They can't struggle again. You've been waiting for Big 12 play and to let loose. So let's see it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is the biggest key that some people are glossing over with this. Not everyone, but like in some of the previews I've seen, Baylor had more sacks, I think, of Texas quarterbacks last year than any other team. I think they had 5 sacks last year. That ghost front gave Texas a lot of issues. And man, Baylor actually has some dudes that can rush the passer from the linebacker position. If they kind of disguise things well pre-snap, throw one of the linebackers at him, like Mike Smith, solid pass rusher. I think he is something like 3rd or 4th in the Big 12 so far this year in quarterback pressures among linebackers. Matt Jones, another experienced linebacker that can get after it. I mean, I guess Byron Vaughn's probably going to play with a chip on his shoulder this game. He's not a bad pass rusher either. So, I think that Texas's interior offensive line got to be ready for this. We saw DJ Campbell get beat on a bad sack last year. I mean, I'd be remiss to say like Cole Hudson, also Hayden Connor. They all kind of struggled.
He almost got Quinn killed on Saturday.
It's true, and
that was a bad sack.
Yeah, and so the interior offensive line. It's the same question we had going into week 2. They played pretty well the last 2 weeks. Played really well against Alabama, and played pretty well against Wyoming, cleaned things up in the second half, kind of similar to week 1 against Rice. But you have to set the tone in this game. You can't have you can't have Ewers getting antsy back there. I think that's one of my biggest keys is the interior offensive line being able to set the tone physically, being able to handle those ghost fronts. I guess I'll pose this question to y'all before we kind of focus on the defense. Do you think from the perspective of the ground game that we lean more on the ground game coming out of the gates and then just try to get Ewers, more opportunities and clean looks, or do we kind of come out 50-50?
I think Texas should just be a run first team.
Okay.
I agree. I think
2 reasons. One, because I think Sark's offense is run first anyway. He's said that multiple times. That's not a new insight. But the other is the receivers are too shaky and so until they prove that they're going to be consistent, we're going to assume they're not going to be. Now, I know I as a philosopher of science who works on induction, you can't always project the future by looking at the past, but still, until we have good reason to think. I mean, look, Quinn hasn't been perfect, but some of these but there are a few times in the 2 games where or actually in 3 games where the effort and concentration hasn't been good enough. So those things all go together. And until we have that solid, you run first, and you should be. You're one of the biggest offensive lines in the country. You have two to three very good running backs, and of course, you have a tight end who you can just play action and get that too. So you don't have to be. I know that Sark maybe really liked it when he had the offense at Alabama where it was working perfectly. Well, it's not there yet. So
yeah, I think the question of whether Texas will be run first this weekend or if they should be is different, because I'm not sure if they will be, but I think they definitely should be. I think, establishing the ground game in any game is huge, but in this game specifically, what we mentioned, Baylor struggles against the run. And like I said, and I'm going to keep saying it throughout the video, the last thing you want to do is get behind in Waco at night. And then, Quinn has to start pressing, gets happy feet, and that ghost pressure is just all up in his face. So I think ideally you come out running it, even 70% of the time in the first quarter and show Aranda and that Baylor defense, we're here to pound you down and see if they can handle it.
Yeah, I guess looking at this number here, this is something I wanted to bring up later when I talk about the concerns, but yeah, I guess I'll just start it now and we can talk more about this later. Do you all know where Texas ranks in terms of drop percentage this season? In the Power 5.
Too damn high.
Yeah, I'll go with that as well.
We are second with a 13.4 drop percentage, which is obscenely bad, only behind Boston College.
With 3 receivers who will play in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't want to go off.
That's the thing. It's one thing if you had 3 receivers like from Tom Herman's teams.
Yeah.
Okay, but you have Worthy who's going to play in the NFL. You have Adonai Mitchell who's going to play in the NFL. Whittington, who I think will make a roster because I think he's valuable in a lot of ways. That's unacceptable.
Yeah, and not to go off on a tangent, but the fact that we hyped up this receiving room
we could do this later just so y'all know, but yeah, keep going, Shane.
No, it is so frustrating, and we got to win against Alabama. That's all you can ask for. But man, all the drops with the talent in that room is ridiculous. It's got to be frustrating for Quinn too. Good on him. He seems to be handling it pretty well, but it's tough to find a rhythm when you're dropping balls. 1 out of every 6 or 7 balls was getting dropped.
I think that this offense should have enough between Jonathan Brooks, who had a fantastic second half last week, CJ Baxter, who they've been resting up, practiced, I believe, all this week. Unleash the ground game, get physical early, get yours in rhythm maybe on the second or third drive and take it from there. So I want to look at the Texas defense now versus the Baylor offense. Baylor's offense, to their credit, has actually done, like I mentioned earlier, pretty well this year. They rank around the mid 30s in offensive efficiency, according to the FBI. They're scoring at a decent clip, around 28, 30 points per game this year, I think, at least. But they're missing some key pieces. Blake Shapen's probably out for this game, their starting quarterback. Dominic Richardson, who I think is an important player for them, Oklahoma State transfer. He's probably out. He suffered a high ankle sprain that kept him out last week. Unfortunately for me too, because I'm in college football fantasy. Didn't know that until game time. But anyway, yeah, they do have some important pieces missing this weekend. They've had a shaky offensive line out of the gates this season. They rank bottom in the Big 12 in pass blocking efficiency rating. They've allowed around somewhere in the ballpark of 25 or 30 quarterback pressures already this season. They've been pretty bad, and that's against mobile quarterbacks, or that's with a mobile quarterback. Both Blake Shapen and Sawyer Robertson can run the ball decently well, at least. And so there's some issues with the Baylor offense. They've had a lot of explosive plays, which is where most of this efficiency has come from. They do have some weapons they can utilize. Richard Reese, pretty explosive guy, running back. Monterey Baldwin, a really speedy guy out of the slot. Keyshawn Jackson, Hal Presley, I think the 2 guys you can get the ball too deep. I mean, Keyshawn Jackson, the Arkansas transfer, a guy that can bring down a lot of contested balls. He's brought down a few already this season. We're talking about here why I think Texas could beat Baylor pretty good. And so this is what I wanted to mention is I think the Baylor's offensive line issues can really, really be magnified against Texas. I think this is by far the best, especially the best interior defensive line they're going to play this season. And if I wanted to say this because I was looking at some of the Baylor previews from the Baylor media earlier today. Two sites said that we rotate Aaron Bryant regularly at nose tackle. And so if that's where I know that Baylor's team might is going to be more prepared than their media is to cover this, but if that's where the headspace is at right now, then this Texas defense should be able to come out and really, really shock this Baylor offense. Baylor has a really bad situation at one of the tackle positions where they've kind of been rotating two guys and have been allowing roughly 5 or 6 quarterback pressures a game early this season. And so I think you can attack the offensive tackle spots early. Their tackles are the weak point in terms of just efficiency so far this year and blown block percentage in the run game. This could be a big game, I'm thinking, for like Ethan Burke, Anthony Hill. You can have some stunts drawn up for Anthony Hill, kind of like you did against Alabama. Sawyer Robertson dealing with a lower body injury of his own, but I mean, still think he's going to play. There's just a lot of Baylor quarterbacks that are banged up. I think Texas could set the tone immediately in the trenches. I don't think that Baylor's got the hog mollies up front, if you will, to be able to deal with Devontae Sweat, Alfred Collins. Apparently by Baylor media is thinking Aaron Bryant. And so set the tone along the defensive line, be more physical than them. You got to handle the ground game. Baylor's going to try to throw everything at you with the ground game, even though Dominic Richardson might be out. You got to still handle their freshman Pendergrass, and then Richard Reese. They're going to try to get him in for some explosive kind of east to west plays, get him outside some of the stretch plays they like to run. Man, I think Texas is really equipped to handle this, though, even in the linebacking core. David Benda, this is where he excels, man. East to west football. If you're just going to try to run it against him, man, Benda can get hats to the football. Jalen Ford, really good at finding the ball. What are y'all thinking for, Texas's front seven against Baylor, pass protection wise in the ground game?
I think just in general, I don't buy that the Baylor offense. I mean, we talked about the Baylor defense not being that great. This isn't an offensive team either. I frankly, I think this offense with Sawyer Robertson at quarterback, I think it stinks. Like, I watched them the past 3 weeks, and besides Blake Shapen slinging it against Texas State.
Sorry, you're gonna get ended up like putting on a bad list like Tarik is with Washington fans.
And what I've seen this year, and like Sawyer Robertson, 45% completion percentage. Sure, he was a talented recruit out of high school, and he could have a one-off game where he just goes crazy. But I don't think that's going to happen, Andrew. Like you mentioned, they're not going to be able to protect him. And he likes to get on the move, and with a lower body injury, he's really going to kind of have to stand in the pocket. I think Texas is going to make it really uncomfortable for him. And like you also mentioned, Andrew, a lot of that offensive, efficiency is coming from the big plays, and that's why the success rate is higher. But if those big plays aren't there, they're going to have trouble moving the ball. And I do actually really like Richard Reese as a running back. He was one of the better freshmen in the Big 12 last year. But it'll be interesting to see if he can handle that full workload with Dominic Richardson out. And, on top of that, their receivers are just as inconsistent as our receivers. Like Monterey Baldwin with the ball in his hands is tough to tackle. He struggles, keeping the ball in his hands. So, yeah, I'm not scared of this offense at all. If Baylor wins this game, I think it's going to be a rock fight where they control 40, minutes of possession and are really just running the ball. Frankly, I think this is one of the worst offenses in the Big 12 if you have Sawyer Robertson at quarterback. If and when Shapen comes back, that completely changes. I was watching the game from last year, and Shapen kind of diced up Texas a little bit. And for as bad as they looked against Texas State on defense, he was playing well on offense. But with Sawyer Robertson and in regard to the game this weekend, I'm not scared at all of the Baylor offense. I think Texas should be able to have its way on defense.
Dark, you got anything for Texas offense versus Baylor defense in general, or front seven versus the line?
I hope to see some more sacks than I saw against Wyoming, but I want a complete, clean game. Like how in those old boxing games, the referee would say, look, guys, I want a nice, clean fight. I want a nice, clean game where the offense looks good, defense looks good. Now, it doesn't have to look amazing, but it just has to look like, okay, offense, we know what we're doing. We got this under control. Defense, we have this under control. Special teams, we have this under control. I don't think that's too much to ask against a team that's literally this bad.
realistically you should be able to control this game beginning to end as long as you can set the tone, because I think that's been Texas's problem is, slow first half starts.
I would just say, sorry to cut you off, more of like a micro concrete point. Baylor's going to try to run the ball on the outside. They like the outside zone. I'd like to see Ethan Burke be solid in run defense on Saturday. That has been his problem thus far, and I think they're going to target that. So it's a big opportunity for him to try to get in there and disrupt. We know Justice Finkley is good against the run, and Barron Sorrell can hold his own, but I think they're going to attack Ethan Burke with Richard Reese on those outside zones. So if we are looking at something where Baylor could find some success, it would be in those outside zones, and hopefully Burke can prove himself.
Yeah, and the thing you always got to remember with Baylor is they're going to try to throw some misdirection at you. They're going to try to motion some guy, maybe like Monterey Baldwin, to try to get him on the opposite side of the field and draw some attention away from the heavy set and run the ball outside. But yeah, I think Texas's linebackers just too experienced to kind of fall for that, and the Texas edge play has been really solid this year, especially in run defense. I'm pretty confident in that regard. So. Kind of mentioned concern on the offense. I guess we'll kind of loop this in with the defense too. The only concern I do have is Baylor does have some guys that can go up and get contested balls, and Jaron Thompson has been beat twice over the top now, just looking a little bit slower. It does concern me a little bit that Baylor can find a way to get out there. Sawyer Robertson does have over 200 passing yards on the deep ball this season. He's ranked in the middle of the pack in terms of deep ball passing grade among Big 12 starting quarterbacks this year. Quinn Ewers being dead last. So I do think there's a way that they can connect on the deep ball this game. That's one that would concern me a little bit, just with the explosive plays. But Texas has found ways, if they do give that up, to respond in a big way. Jaron Thompson got 2 big picks, including a pick 6 last weekend to solve that game away. So, anything else y'all would want to mention for, kind of the Texas defense versus the Baylor offense? All right.
No. Oh. Like you said, the right side of the offensive line is the weak point. So let's attack that and make Robertson uncomfortable. And if he's uncomfortable, I don't see any way Baylor really moves the ball, because if they get behind the chains, they're in trouble. So
yeah, they've not been good on money downs this year either. I think they're low 30s in terms of third down, 4th down conversion rate this year. So yeah, like you said, put them behind the sticks. That's always a surefire way to give yourself a better chance to win. Overall, I'm ready to move into predictions. We can kind of fire off the hip here. We can each give 1 or 2 bold predictions, and we'll give our score for the game, and then we'll get out of here for the week. I'll go ahead and start here. I actually have my bold predictions written down because I haven't gotten them up on the site yet. I thought these sounded bolder than they did before, because we already said JT Sanders can have a big game. Okay, I'll remove that one. I think that Richard Reese total 75 yards and a score in the first half. That's the one that I think we're going to give up. And then I think one for us, Jonathan Brooks has his second straight game with 100 rushing yards in the second half. I think that we can wear them down and then start doing what we want to in the outside zone running game. Not to that degree, but that's why it's a fun bold prediction for me. Score prediction, let's go Texas 31, Baylor 16. I think we're still going to have some struggles out of the gates in this game against their pressure looks and solid linebackers.
So for my offensive bold prediction, I'm going to sort of piggyback off yours, Andrew. I think Jonathan Brooks and Cedric Baxter both go over 100 yards. I think that we're going to see a heavy dose of run, hopefully, and we're going to see some success with that run. So, and then on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to stick on the Texas side of the ball. We were talking about Jaron Thompson, and the Baylor speed can be an issue. I think Aranda's going to try to target that, and I think Jaron Thompson comes up with his 3rd interception in as many games. I could see it being like an underthrown deep ball or something where because Thompson, he's not very fleet of foot, but he makes nice plays on the ball and he has good hands. So I think he's going to get his 3rd in as many games. And score prediction, I was toying with this because going into Waco is never an easy task at night. But I think in regard to my predictions, I have to stop predicting I've been kind of reading it towards like the Texas program over the last decade instead of this specific team. I think that's what's got me in trouble. So this game, I think Texas 34-17. Like I mentioned, the only way Baylor wins this is if they control the ball for 40 minutes and, really just keep Texas offense on the sideline. So
Bold prediction. Jonathan Brooks and CJ Baxter both go over 100 yards and both have a touchdown. I don't know if that's really bold if you're giving up, how much. Maybe bold would be 200 and 2 touchdowns each. I don't know. We'll stick with 100 for now. That, and I think Quinn Ewers goes 4 straight games without an interception. So that's a big
like that one. Yeah, he doesn't have any turnovers this year. So
yeah, that's that. I remember someone posted on Twitter like, look at Klubnik, look at Ewers, and I'm like, okay, one, Ewers is the only one of the 3 that's 3-0, and the other is 2. He hasn't had to throw the ball a ton to try to win the game at the end of the game because the game's basically been over and they could run the ball. So
yeah,
Ewers could have had 500 yards in that Alabama game, but drops and all that. Let's not get into that. So that, and I'll say Texas 38, Baylor 13.
Okay, so you got us winning by 25, I guess by 15. And then, Shane, you got us by 17.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this kind of follows the trend line we usually go by. All right, well, we've each been right once so far this season. So here's to the cycle going back and Tarik being right the first time. Or wait, no, sorry, Shane, you were first. Tarik, you were second. I'd still take that. If it's either of y'all, that means we win by more than. I'm excited for this game because, as much as there's been a lot of primetime games in college football this season, I think this could be. It's going to be a really good environment at McLane Stadium. They announced, I think it was earlier today, maybe it was yesterday, that it's a sellout game. This is the most student tickets that have ever been requested for a game at McLane Stadium. I get McLane Stadium's 7, 8 years old now, so still pretty new, but I think it's going to be a pretty crazy crowd Saturday night in Waco, and I'd like to see us silence that crowd pretty early.
I would have rather had the 6:30 game for next week versus Kansas, but that's neither here nor there, I guess.
Yeah,
it's kind of weird to be having a 2:30 game against potentially an undefeated team and a 6:30 game against a team that's should be 0-3.
I mean, take the primetime games on ABC when you get them, especially in winnable situations. So,
yeah, that's right. All right,
look good on national television. But anyway, for Andrew Miller, Tarik LaCour, Shane Black at Hook'emHeadlines.com. Well, at least I will see you all on Saturday night. That's pretty much it. Welcome.
Welcome.